The freezing December wind was absolutely brutal. It cut right through Margaret's thin, cream-colored dress as she shivered on the bench. She was only 24 years old, but months of surviving on the freezing streets had made her look much older. She had lost literally everything. Her blonde hair hung limp, and her bare feet were completely numb against the icy pavement. Just 3 days ago, she had to make a heartbreaking choice. She sold her very last pair of shoes just to buy a little food. As the snow fell softly, blurring the streetlights into glowing halos of gold and red, Margaret pulled her knees tight against her chest. The small bus shelter barely blocked the wind. She watched wrapped up, cozy strangers hurry past, rushing home to warm houses she could only dream of. She felt completely invisible, but then through the thick falling snow, a tiny figure appeared. It was a little girl, maybe 4 years old, wearing a bright burgundy dress under a grey knitted cap. She was walking so carefully, concentrating hard on every single step. In her mittened hand she tightly gripped a small paper bag. The little girl stopped right in front of Margaret. She stared at her with deep, serious brown eyes. "Are you cold?" the child asked, her voice ringing clearly in the quiet winter air. Margaret forced a weak smile. "A little, sweetheart, but I'll be okay." The girl looked down at Margaret's bare, frozen feet, then looked back up at her face. Without saying a single word, she held out the paper bag. "This is for you." Margaret's throat tightened with emotion. "Oh, honey, I can't take your food." "It's okay," the child replied simply. "Daddy bought me cookies." "But you look hungry." Just behind the little girl, a man in a dark coat stood silently watching them. The snow was piling up on his shoulders, but he didn't call the child back or try to stop her. With shaking hands, Margaret took the bag. Inside were fresh cookies from a local bakery, still radiating warmth. The sweet smell alone brought instant tears to her eyes. "Thank you," Margaret whispered. The little girl tilted her head, looking at Margaret with a deep wisdom that seemed way too old for a child. Then she uttered a sentence that was about to shatter Margaret's entire world. "You need a home, and I need a mommy." The words seemed to freeze in the snowy air between them. Margaret stared at the child, completely stunned. Her heart raced. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Margaret managed to ask. "Lucy," the girl said. "My mommy went to heaven. Daddy says she's an angel now. Are you an angel?" "No, baby," Margaret choked out. "I'm just someone who made some mistakes." Lucy reached out her little hand and gently touched Margaret's cheek. "Daddy says everyone makes mistakes. That's why we need love." At that moment, the man finally walked over. He looked to be at about 40 years old, with kind eyes that hid a deep, heavy sadness. He knelt down right next to his daughter. "I'm sorry," he said to Margaret gently. "Lucy has a special way of finding people who need help. I'm Daniel Hayes." Margaret immediately started to apologize, stammering that she didn't mean to bother them, but Daniel held up his hand to stop her. "My daughter is right," he said softly. "You need a warm shelter, and we have an extra room. My wife passed away 6 months ago. The house just feels too empty now." He paused, looking at her earnestly. "I'm not making any promises beyond tonight, but absolutely no one should be out here in this freezing cold. If you want a warm meal and a safe place to sleep, the offer is yours." Living on the streets had taught Margaret to be incredibly careful. She knew how dangerous it was to trust strangers. But looking into Daniel's honest eyes and seeing Lucy's pure, innocent faith, something felt entirely real. "I don't want charity," Margaret whispered. "It's not charity," Daniel replied. "It's just humanity. Someone helped me out once when I was down. I'm just passing it forward." Lucy grabbed Margaret's hand. "Please come home with us. It's Christmas soon, and Santa brings presents to people who have homes." Looking at this little girl in the grey knitted cap offering total acceptance, and this father offering pure kindness without judging her, something broke wide open inside Margaret's chest. A frozen, hopeless place deep inside her suddenly melted. "Okay," she whispered, "just for tonight." But that single night quickly turned into several. Daniel gave Margaret the guest room and asked for absolutely nothing in return, except for her to eat meals with them. Lucy attached herself to Margaret instantly. She eagerly showed her every single toy, every book, and every corner of the house. As the days passed, Margaret learned more about them. She found out Daniel was a school teacher and that his wife had tragically died in a car accident. The massive grief had made their house feel way too big and quiet. She also noticed that Lucy suffered from terrible nightmares, but having Margaret close by seemed to instantly comfort the little girl. In return, Margaret finally shared her own painful past. She explained the sudden job loss, the overwhelming medical bills from her mother's final illness, and the fast chain of events that unexpectedly left her homeless. She had never struggled with addiction, and she had never been in trouble with the law. She was simply an unlucky person who had been too proud to ask for help until it was too late. Daniel listened to every word without a single hint of judgment. "Life can break any of us," he said quietly. "What really matters is whether someone is there to help us stand back up." Over the next few weeks, Margaret began to heal. Daniel helped her secure a job at the local library. Meanwhile, Lucy insisted that Margaret tuck her into bed every single night, a sweet routine that became deeply important to both of them. One evening, 3 months later, Margaret walked into the living room and found Daniel looking through old photographs of his late wife. "She would have really liked you," Daniel said softly. "Amanda always used to say that kindness recognizes kindness." Margaret sat down right next to him. "Lucy offered me her bakery cookies that night, but she actually gave me so much more. She gave me a reason to believe in the goodness of people again." Daniel nodded. "She really needed you, too. Ever since you walked through our door, she started smiling again, really smiling." Right then, Lucy walked into the room in her nightgown, still wearing her favorite grey cap on her head. She wore it all the time now, almost like a little shield against the world. She walked right up to Margaret and asked a direct question. "Are you staying forever?" Margaret looked up at Daniel. He gave her a warm, encouraging nod. "If you'll have me," Margaret said, tears welling up. "I would like that very much." Lucy happily climbed right into her lap. "Good, because you're my mommy now," I told Santa, and he said it was totally okay. Margaret tightly hugged the precious child, marveling at the family that had rescued her from the freezing snow. She thought back to that bitter winter night, how close she had been to completely giving up on life, and how one tiny act of kindness had lit a bright candle in her darkest hour. Daniel reached over to hold them, and the three of them sat closely together. They were a real family now, formed not by blood, but by pure compassion and the simple human need to belong and be loved. Outside, the snow continued to fall gently, but inside the house, everything was incredibly warm. Sometimes angels really do appear in our darkest moments. Sometimes they wear grey knitted caps and carry warm cookies. And sometimes, if we are just brave enough to accept their gifts, they save us from the cold.